You think an old man like me has nothing to teach you? Jack Lawson's voice was steady, cutting through the noise of the kids laughing outside his window. The sun was just beginning to set, casting long shadows across the quiet suburban street. It wasn't the first time the neighborhood kids had made fun of him, but today, something felt different. The way they mocked him, it wasn't just the usual teasing. It was the kind of dismissive laughter that made you feel invisible, like you didn't matter. And that was something Jack had never been able to tolerate. He had lived through too much to let anyone, especially a bunch of kids, treat him like that. As the laughter echoed through his yard, Jack quietly stepped outside. His movements were slow, deliberate. At 85, his body wasn't as quick as it used to be, but his mind still moved like it was back in his prime. The kids didn't notice him at first. They were too busy, too caught up in their own world, throwing footballs and running through sprinklers. Jack stood there for a moment, watching them, his weathered hands resting by his sides. He didn't look like a war hero. He didn't look like someone who had been through hell and back. He looked like just another old man, nothing special, nothing to see. But the kids didn't know that. Not yet. One of them, a boy named Tommy, was the first to notice him. "Hey, old man," Tommy yelled, his voice dripping with that youthful arrogance. "What are you doing out here? You lost or something?" The others laughed, poking fun at his slow pace, the old clothes, the cane he leaned on. Jack didn't say anything. He just watched them, the quiet fury growing inside him. This wasn't about them. It was about him, and the years he had earned. He had seen things they would never understand. "What's your name, anyway?" Tommy asked, stepping closer. "Jack," he replied, his voice calm, but there was a sharpness in it that made Tommy pause. "Just Jack." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "Yeah," Jack said, his gaze steady. "But I'm more than just a name. You kids don't know who I am, do you?" Tommy snorted. "You're just some old guy living in the neighborhood. I bet you can't even keep up with us." Jack smiled, a little sad. "You think that because I'm old, I can't teach you anything? Well, let me tell you something." He took a deep breath, his chest rising slowly. "When I was your age, I was in places you couldn't even imagine. Places where a wrong move could mean your life. I've seen things that would make your head spin. And I've survived them." He paused, letting the word sink in, then continued. "I've trained men, fought battles, saved lives. But the hardest thing I've ever done is make it home and keep going." Tommy's smile faltered. The others had stopped laughing, sensing something in the air shift. "You're just an old man with a lot of stories," Tommy said, but his voice wavered a little. Jack stepped forward, his cane tapping against the ground with a firm rhythm. "I've got more than stories," he said, his voice firm, carrying the weight of his past. "I've got discipline. Something you all could use a little more of. You think you know what it takes to get by in this world, but you don't." "Not yet." Tommy didn't respond. The air was thick with tension. The other kids stood in silence, watching the old man with wide eyes. For the first time, they weren't laughing. They were listening. "Discipline," Jack continued, "is what keeps you alive when everything else falls apart. It's what makes you stand tall when everyone else is running scared. It's the difference between winning and losing, between making it through the night and not." Tommy swallowed, his bravado disappearing. "Now," Jack said, pointing to a nearby tree. "I want you to run 10 laps around that tree, right now. And when you're done, come back here and tell me you learned something about discipline. It's not about strength. It's about knowing when to keep going, even when your body tells you to stop." The kids looked at each other, unsure of what to do. But there was something in Jack's eyes, something that made them realize he wasn't just talking about running. He was talking about life. And for the first time, they understood. They didn't run right away, but when they did, they ran with purpose. Jack stood there, watching them, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. They might not fully understand yet, but they were starting to get it. And that was enough for him. As the kids finished their laps, sweat dripped down their faces, their breath coming in short, laboured bursts. They looked back at Jack Lawson, who stood silently by the tree, watching them with the same calm, steady gaze he always had. Tommy, the first to finish, was the first to speak, his voice hesitant but full of curiosity. "Okay, old man," he said, catching his breath. "What now?" Jack didn't answer right away. He simply nodded, his eyes scanning the group. They were all breathing hard, but there was something else in their eyes now, a shift. It wasn't just the exhaustion. It was the beginning of understanding. "Now," Jack began, his voice low but carrying, "you sit. You listen. And you learn." The kids, still panting, dropped onto the grass in front of him, sitting cross-legged. Jack sat down as well, his old bones creaking slightly, but his posture remained perfect, as if the years had not taken their toll on the lessons he had learned long ago. "Discipline," Jack said, his voice steady as he looked at each of them, "is not just about doing what you're told. It's about understanding why you do it. It's about pushing yourself past what you think you can do and then doing it again." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the cool evening air. "When I was your age," Jack continued, his gaze softening as he spoke, "I was fighting in a war. A war that cost a lot of good men their lives. We didn't have the luxury of thinking we couldn't go any further. We didn't have the choice to quit." Tommy, who had been quiet for a while now, leaned forward. "But you're just a neighbor, right?" he asked, his voice unsure, like he was still trying to piece everything together. Jack chuckled softly, his smile warm but tinged with something deeper. "I might just be a neighbor to you, Tommy," he said, "but I've been more than that in my life. And I don't tell you this to impress you. I tell you this because it's the truth. You can't learn discipline if you don't understand the cost of it." The kids listened in rapt attention now, their earlier mocking smiles long gone. They were hearing something different from Jack now, something that wasn't about old man stories, but about the weight of his experiences. "When you're in the middle of something that matters," Jack went on, "when everything is on the line, you don't think about how tired you are or how much you want to quit. You push forward. That's the difference between a man who survives and one who doesn't." The group was silent, each kid processing his words in their own way. Jack looked out across the yard, his mind drifting for a moment before he refocused. "I want you to remember something," Jack said, his voice firm now. "Discipline is the ability to stay focused, even when the world wants you to give up. It's the ability to keep your head, even when everyone around you is losing theirs." The kids didn't respond right away. They didn't need to. The air between them had shifted. The respect was there, but it wasn't just for Jack's military past. It was for who he was now, the man who had lived through things they couldn't even imagine and still had the strength to share those lessons. Tommy stood up first, wiping the sweat from his forehead. He gave Jack a slow nod, the kind of nod that said he was starting to get it. "Thanks, Mr. Lawson," he said, his voice more respectful than before. The other kids stood up too, each one offering their own nod or quiet acknowledgement. They didn't need words. They had learned something today. And it wasn't just about running laps or following orders. It was about something deeper, something that would stay with them long after they left Jack's yard. As the sun set behind the trees, casting long shadows across the neighborhood, Jack watched them walk away, feeling a quiet sense of pride. They hadn't just learned about discipline. They had learned what it meant to respect someone who had earned it the hard way. The next day, Jack sat on his porch, watching the kids from his neighborhood as they passed by. He noticed Tommy and his friends, the same ones who had mocked him just a day before, now walking with a different kind of step, calmer, more focused. They had learned something the day before, but it wasn't just about discipline. It was about respect. The kids didn't notice him at first, but Tommy, the leader of the group, caught sight of Jack and hesitated. He walked up to the porch, his friends following behind him. "Hey, Mr. Lawson," Tommy said, his voice much more respectful than it had been the day before. We wanted to thank you for yesterday. For showing us, well, what real discipline is." Jack looked up at him, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You're welcome," he said simply, not making a big deal out of it. "But remember, it's not just about running laps. It's about how you carry yourself every day. It's about doing the right thing, even when no one is watching." Tommy nodded, and there was a moment of silence before he spoke again. "You said something yesterday, about not quitting. About pushing through. I think we all got a taste of that when we finished our laps. It felt good. Like we could do anything." Jack looked out at the group, seeing them standing there, not as the kids who had ridiculed him, but as a group of young people who had begun to understand something deeper. "Good," Jack said, leaning back in his chair, his voice steady. "That's the first step. You'll face a lot of challenges in life, and the world will try to knock you down. But it's how you handle those moments that defines who you are." The kids shifted, exchanging looks, each of them processing his words in their own way. Tommy spoke up again. "I think we need more of this, more of you teaching us." Jack chuckled softly. "I don't need to be the one teaching you," he said. "You've got all the tools you need. It's just about knowing how to use them. And remembering that the hardest part is often just getting started." The group stayed for a while, listening to Jack as he spoke. He didn't tell them stories of war or share more about his past. That wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the lesson he had given them the day before, a lesson about discipline, about pushing through when things get tough. When they finally stood to leave, there was no mockery, no laughter, only a quiet acknowledgement between them and Jack. "Thanks again, Mr. Lawson," Tommy said as he turned to walk away, the rest of the group following him. Jack nodded, watching them leave, a feeling of contentment settling in his chest. The kids didn't need to know all the details of his past. They didn't need to know the battles he had fought or the medals he had earned. What mattered was that they had learned something about themselves, something that would stick with them for years to come. And that, Jack thought, was enough. Weeks passed, and Jack Lawson's life settled into its quiet routine. The kids who had once laughed at him now gave him nods of respect whenever they saw him. It wasn't much, but it was enough for Jack to know that his lesson had taken root. He didn't expect them to become perfect overnight, but he had planted a seed, and that was all he needed. One warm afternoon, as Jack sat on his porch, he noticed Tommy walking up the street with a familiar look of determination on his face. He wasn't alone this time. Several of the other kids, including the ones who had been most dismissive of Jack in the past, were with him. They walked up to Jack's porch, and Tommy was the first to speak. "Mr. Lawson," he began, his voice steady, "we were talking, and we realized we've been doing it all wrong. You know, we've been taking the easy way out, cutting corners. But we get it now. We want to learn more." Jack looked at them, surprised but pleased. The group wasn't mocking him or making jokes. They were serious. "What do you want to learn?" Jack asked, his voice calm but with an edge of curiosity. Tommy glanced at his friends before replying. "We want to learn about responsibility. About being disciplined, not just in the stuff you told us yesterday, but in life, at home, at school. Everything." Jack studied them for a moment, his old eyes sharp despite the wrinkles that marked his face. "Responsibility," he echoed slowly. "That's a big one. You can't just decide to be responsible. It's something you build every day. It's about taking ownership of what you do and how you live." The group sat down on the steps of Jack's porch, eager to listen. They had come here to learn, not to play games. "When I was your age," Jack said, leaning forward slightly, "I had to grow up fast. It wasn't a choice. There were things I had to do, things I had to face, that made me understand what it meant to be responsible. To make decisions not just for myself, but for the people around me." The kids sat still, their eyes fixed on him. Jack continued, "Being responsible isn't always about doing what you want. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard. It's about showing up when you're supposed to, keeping your promises, and owning up to your mistakes when you make them." Tommy raised his hand, his eyes filled with curiosity. "But what if we mess up?" he asked. Jack smiled gently, his voice softening. You will mess up, he said simply. Everyone does. The important part isn't whether you mess up. It's what you do after. You own it. You learn from it. And you do better next time. There was a long pause, and then one of the other kids, a girl named Sarah, spoke up. So it's not about being perfect, she asked, her voice tinged with doubt. Jack shook his head. No. Perfection isn't the goal. The goal is to keep moving forward, no matter what. To take responsibility for who you are and what you do, even when it's difficult. The kids sat in silence for a moment, letting Jack's words sink in. For the first time, they understood that responsibility wasn't a burden, it was a way of showing respect for themselves and the world around them. So, Tommy said, breaking the silence, how do we start? Jack leaned back in his chair, looking out across the yard. Start small, he said. Take responsibility for your actions, your words, and your time. When you make a mistake, don't run from it. Own it. And if you don't know how to fix it, ask for help. There's no shame in that. The kids looked at each other, nodding. They were beginning to understand what it meant to be responsible. Not just for their own actions, but for how they treated others, how they carried themselves in the world. As the afternoon wore on, Jack watched the kids leave, each one walking with a new sense of purpose. They didn't have all the answers, but they were starting to look for them. And for Jack, that was enough. Weeks went by, and Jack Lawson noticed a subtle change in the kids. They didn't come by as often, but when they did, they were different. Their conversations were quieter, more thoughtful. The mockery that used to hang in the air whenever they were around him was gone. Replaced by a sort of respect and understanding that had slowly grown over time. It wasn't that they were perfect, they were still kids, after all. But they were better. Jack could see it in the way they carried themselves, in the way they interacted with others. They were learning, in their own way, what it meant to live with discipline and responsibility. One afternoon, Jack was sitting on his porch when he saw Tommy and a few of the others walking down the street. They weren't laughing or shouting like they had been months ago. Instead, they walked with purpose, like they were on a mission. Tommy spotted Jack and waved. Mr. Lawson, he called out, his voice carrying over the quiet street. Jack nodded and stood, his old joints creaking slightly as he made his way toward them. What's up, Tommy? Jack asked, his voice warm but curious. Tommy grinned, but it wasn't the same cocky grin from before. We just wanted to say a thanks, again. For everything. We've been trying to, do better. And it's working. Jack raised an eyebrow, a small smile forming on his lips. Do better at what? At everything, Tommy said, his voice more serious now. At school, at home, even with our friends. We've been trying to hold ourselves to a higher standard, just like you said. Jack studied Tommy and the others for a moment, taking in the change in them. They weren't the same group of kids who had dismissed him months ago. They had matured, just a little, but enough for Jack to see it. You're not perfect, and you won't be, Jack said slowly. But that's not the point. The point is, you're trying. And that's all anyone can ask for. The kids nodded, their faces serious now. They were starting to realize that the lessons Jack had shared with them weren't just about being disciplined or responsible, they were about being better people, even when it was hard. So, what now? Tommy asked, his voice hopeful. Jack thought for a moment before answering. Now, you keep going. You keep pushing yourself. You keep learning from your mistakes, and you never stop trying to be better than you were yesterday. Tommy and the others nodded again, this time with a quiet sense of determination. Jack could tell they were ready to face whatever came next, and that made him proud. You've learned a lot, Jack said, his voice soft but full of pride. But don't forget this, it's not about how fast you run or how many laps you can do. It's about how you handle life when it gets tough. And trust me, life will get tough. But if you keep going, you'll be ready for whatever comes your way. The kids stood there for a moment, looking at Jack with a mix of gratitude and something else, something deeper. It wasn't just respect anymore. It was understanding. They were no longer just the kids who had made fun of the old man down the street. They were the kids who had learned something real, something that would stick with them for the rest of their lives. As they walked away, Jack watched them go, feeling a quiet sense of fulfillment settle in his chest. It wasn't about making them perfect. It was about making them better. And in that moment, Jack knew that he had done just that. Months went by, and the neighborhood began to change in small but noticeable ways. Jack Lawson's influence, quiet as it had been, lingered in the air like a steady, grounding presence. The kids, once filled with carefree mockery and an arrogant sense of invincibility, had begun to show more responsibility, more purpose. Tommy, in particular, had transformed. His posture had straightened, his focus sharpened, and his attitude toward life had become more deliberate. Jack could see it in the way Tommy handled challenges, his approach to his homework, the respect he now showed his parents, even his interactions with his friends. It wasn't just Jack's lessons about discipline and responsibility that had shaped him, though. Tommy had taken those lessons and made them his own. One day, as Jack sat on his porch with a cup of coffee, Tommy came walking down the street, alone this time. He was wearing his school jacket and his face carried a look of purpose. When he reached Jack's porch, he stopped for a moment, taking a deep breath. "Mr. Lawson," Tommy said, his voice steady, "I just wanted to thank you again for everything. For teaching me that there's more to life than just going through the motions." Jack looked up from his cup, his expression calm. "You're welcome," he said, his voice warm. "But it's not about me. It's about you. You're the one who decided to change." Tommy nodded, looking down at the ground for a moment before meeting Jack's eyes again. "I know. And I've been trying. But there's one thing that's still been bothering me. I'm trying to do things the right way, but sometimes I feel like it's not enough. Like I'm still falling short." Jack set his cup down and leaned forward slightly. "You're not falling short, Tommy. You're growing. It's not about being perfect. It's about pushing yourself to be better than you were yesterday. Every day, you make a choice. And you're choosing to be better. That's what counts." Tommy's eyes softened as he listened, the doubt in his expression slowly fading. "But what about when it feels hard?" he asked quietly. "When everything's going wrong, and it feels like giving up would be so much easier." Jack chuckled softly, his eyes crinkling with the wisdom of his years. "That's when it counts the most. When it's hard, when you're tempted to quit, that's when your character is built. It's not about what you do when things are easy. It's about how you respond when things are tough." Tommy thought about that for a moment, his gaze turning inward. "I think I get it," he said slowly. "It's about sticking to what's right, even when it feels like no one's watching." "Exactly," Jack replied, his voice low but firm. "The world doesn't always give you the credit you deserve. And sometimes, the right choice isn't the easy choice. But if you keep doing the right thing, even when it's hard, you'll build something that lasts." Tommy stood a little taller, a new sense of confidence settling in his stance. "I'm going to keep trying, Mr. Lawson. I don't think I'll ever stop trying." Jack nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "That's all anyone can ask of you, Tommy." The two stood there for a moment, the weight of the conversation lingering between them. Tommy turned to leave, but then he stopped and looked back at Jack. "Thanks, Mr. Lawson. I think you're right. It's not about being perfect. It's about trying." Jack watched him walk away, a sense of fulfillment washing over him. Tommy had figured it out. And in that moment, Jack knew that the work he'd done wasn't just about teaching a lesson, it was about shaping a future, one kid at a time. The weeks turned into months, and the once tight-knit group of kids who had mocked Jack Lawson had now become a quieter, more introspective bunch. Tommy, especially, seemed to carry himself differently. His classmates had noticed the change too. Where he once rushed through life, now he took the time to listen, to think before acting. It wasn't just about showing up at Jack's house anymore. It was about finding a way to make those lessons work in the real world. One evening, as the first hint of fall crisped the air, Tommy and his friends gathered at the park. They weren't just playing anymore. This time, they were sitting in a circle, the soft murmur of their voices mixing with the rustling of the leaves. Jack had never told them how to deal with everything, only that they had to try. But there they were, trying. Tommy looked up from the group, his eyes scanning the familiar street as Jack's house came into view. He had come a long way since that day he had first walked up to Jack's porch. The doubts, the uncertainty that had clouded his thoughts, had slowly been replaced by a clarity that surprised him. He stood up, motioning to the others. "I think it's time we go talk to Mr. Lawson again," he said. "He's helped us before, and I feel like there's more we can learn." The others nodded in agreement. It was different this time. The laughter from before had turned into something more earnest, more reflective. They weren't just trying to please Jack anymore, they were trying to understand the lessons he had shared. When they reached Jack's porch, Tommy knocked on the door. It opened slowly, and there stood Jack, as steady as ever. He smiled when he saw them. "Well, look who's come to visit," he said. "What's on your minds?" Tommy stepped forward, his friends behind him. "Mr. Lawson," Tommy began, "we've been trying to put your lessons into practice, but there's something we're struggling with." Jack gestured for them to sit. "Take a seat. Tell me what's going on." The group settled around him, and Tommy continued. "We're doing better at school, at home, but we keep facing obstacles. Sometimes it feels like we're still falling short, even when we're trying our hardest." Jack nodded, his eyes never leaving them. "Life is full of obstacles," he said, his voice calm but firm. "The key is how you respond to them. It's not about avoiding challenges. It's about facing them head-on and choosing to learn from them, no matter how hard they may seem." One of the other kids, Sarah, spoke up. "But what if we fail? We've tried and failed before. It's discouraging." Jack's expression softened, and he leaned back in his chair. "Failing isn't the problem," he said. "The problem is not trying again. You will fail. You will make mistakes. But as long as you keep pushing, as long as you get back up and keep going, you'll learn more from that failure than you ever could from success alone." Tommy thought about that for a moment. So, it's not about never failing. Jack shook his head, his voice steady. "No, Tommy. It's about failing, learning, and then trying again. Success isn't about getting everything right. It's about building the strength to keep going, no matter how many times you fall down." There was a long silence as the kids processed his words. It was clear now. They had been focused too much on the idea of never failing, when the true lesson was in resilience. "I think I get it," Tommy said, his voice low but steady. "It's not about being perfect. It's about doing our best, learning, and improving each time." Jack smiled, proud of how far they had come. "Exactly," he said. "And remember, every time you fall, you're one step closer to getting it right." The kids left Jack's porch that evening, a renewed sense of purpose in their steps. They knew there would be more challenges ahead, but for the first time, they understood that it was okay to fail, as long as they kept moving forward. They weren't perfect, but they were getting better every day. And that, Jack thought, was the real victory. Months passed, and the world around Jack Lawson's neighborhood continued to shift, though in subtle ways. The group of kids he had once mentored had grown even more. They had their ups and downs, but the core of what Jack had taught them, discipline, responsibility, and resilience, was firmly rooted in their hearts. Tommy was still at the forefront of this transformation. He had taken the lessons to heart and carried them with him, but he had also become someone the others looked to for guidance. One afternoon, Tommy came by Jack's house again. This time, he was alone, walking with a determined step, his jacket buttoned up against the chilly fall air. He knocked at the door, and Jack opened it, greeting him with a warm smile. "Tommy, what brings you by?" Jack asked, stepping aside to let the young man in. Tommy nodded as he entered the familiar porch, a bit more serious than usual. Mr. Lawson, I wanted to talk to you. There's been something on my mind lately, something I think I need your help with. Jack gestured for Tommy to sit in the rocking chair across from him. He took a seat himself, his movement slower now, but still steady. What's going on, Tommy? Jack asked, his voice patient. Tommy hesitated for a moment before speaking. I've been doing well, at least, I think I have. But I've started to realize something. It's like I've been working on being disciplined, trying to set an example for the others, but there are still times when I feel lost. Like, even after everything we've learned, I'm still not sure I'm doing enough. Jack nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. That's normal, Tommy. You're growing, and with growth comes uncertainty. You might feel lost sometimes, but that's not a sign of failure. It's a sign that you're still searching for the best version of yourself. And that's the journey. It never ends. Tommy sat back, looking at the ground for a moment. I guess I always thought there would be a point where I'd have it all figured out. I thought I'd reach some place where I'd just know how to do everything right. Jack chuckled softly, shaking his head. Tommy, nobody ever reaches that point. There's no such thing as having it all figured out. Life is about making choices, learning from them, and then making better choices the next time. The key is to keep moving forward, even when you don't have all the answers. Tommy looked up, his expression thoughtful. So, it's not about having it all figured out. Jack smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Exactly. It's about how you deal with the uncertainty. How you push through even when the path isn't clear. And that's where real growth happens. Tommy's expression softened, and a small sense of peace settled over him. I think I understand, he said slowly. It's about learning and growing, even when things don't go the way you want. Just keep going, keep trying, even if it feels like you're not getting it perfect. Jack nodded. That's it. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to keep doing your best and learning from the process. Life's not about avoiding mistakes. It's about handling them with grace, learning from them, and keeping your head held high. There was a long pause as Tommy absorbed the words. Finally, he looked up with a new sense of clarity in his eyes. Thanks, Mr. Lawson, he said, his voice steady. You've helped me see that I don't have to have all the answers. I just need to keep moving forward, one step at a time. Jack smiled, watching Tommy with a quiet pride. That's all anyone can do, Tommy. That's all anyone can do. Tommy stood up, his shoulders a little straighter than before. I'll keep going. I won't stop. Jack watched him leave, his heart feeling lighter. Tommy had learned what many never would, that the journey wasn't about being perfect, it was about being resilient, about taking each step with purpose, even when the road ahead was uncertain. It was a bright spring afternoon when Jack Lawson received the call. His phone rang, a simple noise that jolted him out of his quiet afternoon. He picked it up, recognizing the number immediately. It was Tommy. Mr. Lawson, I need to talk to you, Tommy's voice came through, urgent but steady. Jack sat up, his heart catching for a moment. What's wrong, Tommy? He asked, his voice calm. I don't know if this is the right thing to do, Tommy said, his words rushed. But I think I need your advice. There's an opportunity, a big one, but it's going to mean stepping out of my comfort zone. I'm not sure if I'm ready. Jack leaned back in his chair, the quiet of the afternoon settling in around him. Tell me about it, he said simply. Tommy took a deep breath. There's a job opening at the local community center. They want me to help lead a youth program. It's a big responsibility, and they've been asking me to step up for a while now. But I'm scared. What if I mess up? What if I can't handle it? Jack smiled softly, hearing the familiar doubt in Tommy's voice. You're asking the wrong question, Tommy, Jack said, his voice steady. It's not about whether you can handle it. It's about whether you're willing to try. Tommy was silent for a moment, the weight of Jack's words sinking in. I've been trying to do better, Mr. Lawson. I've been learning from everything you've taught me, but this feels different. This feels like more. Jack nodded, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. It is more, he said. It's a bigger responsibility, but that doesn't mean you can't handle it. You've been building the skills for this, one step at a time. Every challenge you've faced, every time you didn't give up, has been preparing you for this moment. The question is, are you willing to step up, even when it's hard? Tommy sighed, the uncertainty still heavy in his voice. But what if I fail? What if I let people down? Jack's voice softened, but it was firm, like the reassurance of a father. Tommy, you're going to fail. We all do. The key is how you respond. If you're afraid of failing, then you'll never grow. But if you take it on, knowing you might stumble, and you keep going anyway, that's how you succeed. Tommy was quiet again, processing the words. I don't know if I can do it, he finally said. But I guess I'll never know if I don't try, right? Jack chuckled. Exactly. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to take the first step. The rest will follow. Tommy's voice was more confident now, the doubt slowly fading away. I'm going to do it, he said, his tone resolute. I'm going to take the job. I won't let fear stop me. Jack smiled, feeling a sense of pride swell in his chest. I knew you would, he said softly. You've got everything you need to succeed. Just remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about showing up, learning, and doing the best you can every single day. As Tommy hung up, Jack sat back in his chair, looking out the window at the street that had seen so many moments of change. He had watched Tommy grow, watched him face doubt and fear, and now he was stepping up, taking on more than he ever thought possible. Jack had taught him the tools, but it was Tommy's decision to use them. That made all the difference. And as Jack sat in his quiet home, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The work wasn't over, but the seeds had been planted. Tommy was ready, and that was all Jack had ever hoped for.